It is just a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Mark Adams. He is now retired, but previously he was 23 years in private solo practice in Flint, Michigan, but 17 years with ClearChoice Dental Implant Centers. I've been trying to get him on here. I swear to God, I've done 1,600 podcasts, and you were like one of the first ones I reached out to. Did a lot of did some other people from that company, and but he's the founding prosthodontist and chief clinical officer. He was the founding prosthodontist and chief clinical officer of ClearChoice. He's currently serving on the board of directors of Salt Dental, a pediatric orthodontic DSO. He's a chairperson of the Colorado Dental Board, serving his 8th and final year in that position. I bet that's a lot of stress. His alma mater in graduation, University of Michigan School of Dentistry 83, University of Michigan Rec and Graduate School Prosthodontics 85. You guys, he started this ClearChoice deal and from 1 to 80 locations. And also, you were the only DSO that I felt could have gone public. One of the biggest red flags of DSOs is, how does Snapchat go public? Look at all the crazy companies that are going public, but no dental DSO has ever gone public. The only 3 publicly traded dental DSOs in the world, 2 of them are in Australia and one's in Singapore. And I interviewed the founders of all those, and all 3 of those had the same business model. But what you guys did was the classic business model of 1 + 1 = 3, but you did like 1 + 1 = 5. You took the customer first, and you said, okay, we need the dentist, the prosthodontist, the surgeon, the lab tech, all in one room. And this is America. I mean, if you got the money, you want to walk in and walk out with a new set of teeth, only in America. And it was a crazy idea. It was crazy ambition, and you guys pulled it off. And it was sold several times. And now I think Aspen has it. But he's participated in 2 significant modes of dental practice: a private solo practice, as well as practicing in DSO model. He's also served as a DSO executive. He's the founding prosthodontist of ClearChoice Dental Implant Centers, which was the first organization to create patient access to same-day dental implants, specializing in the all-on-4 immediate protocol procedure by providing the specialist the technology and the laboratory all in one location. You trained in Portugal with the founder of the procedure, Dr. Paulo Malo, who we podcast interviewed, an amazing man. During your career at ClearChoice, took the operation from 1 to 80 centers. They're now part of Aspen Group with 100 centers. He's been involved with multiple private equity. I could go. Your bio is 1.5 miles long, and I could go on.
You must have talked to my mom. So.
It's just amazing what you did. And I remember when you guys launched in Phoenix. I forgot what year it was, but at first you heard the all the back talk about, DSOs or blah 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 blah. And then you start hearing like, oh my God, you guys were doing so much television advertising that every dentist, I remember the first time I heard all on 4 was a patient that watched one of your infomercials for 30 minutes in the middle of the night on TV. And I'm like, what? All on, I had to go to Dental Town. You
You
made it a
raise
household name.
you raise a couple of very interesting points. First, I practiced for 23 years in Flint, Michigan, right? And I was part of what I would call the old boys club, right? I had been, I had worked my way up through the local dental society. I was the past president of the dental society. I was the editor of the newsletter. I was a delegate to the state convention, all those kinds of things, right? So I was part of organized dentistry. And then I moved to Denver, and we start this in a DSO model, and I am evil personified. My colleagues in Denver, right to my face, told me that it was malpractice to do an immediate load maxillary all-on-4 procedure. And this is after I got back from Portugal and saw what Malo was doing, and my mind was just blown. And I was like, how am I going to get my colleagues in the United States to understand that they're behind the times here, right? They're not practicing at an advanced level. But it was a very cultural experience, going from being like part of the club in Michigan. And when I moved to Colorado, I was just evil personified, you know.
Well, you don't have that evil face though, man. You need to get some horns or do something. But yeah, you know what? I remember when Rick Workman was on the podcast, he said he called it dogs bark at things they don't understand.
Yeah.
And what
Yeah.
dentists
And
don't understand is well, dentists all around the world. I mean, you go to Thailand and they think they have the best dentistry in the world. You go to Japan, they know they have the
sure,
best dentistry in the world. And you just don't know what you don't know. And when dentists whine to me about how hard they've had it from their colleagues, I'm like, look, the only sign of success in dentistry is an arrow right in your back. And I mean, I lived out here with Omar Reed. When I got to town, he had so many arrows in his back, I couldn't even see the man. You know what I mean? It took
sure, sure.
years to even get to know him because when I remember meeting Omar Reed, you already had all these biases that just because like the 90-second crown prep, that's
Yes,
what he said,
right.
and people
Sure,
don't understand. They didn't even listen to what he said. Everybody that complained about him didn't even listen. He said that you drill, rinse, dry, look, drill, rinse, dry, look. Drill, just get in there and drill it. It only takes 90 seconds to drill a prep if you just drill the damn thing. I mean, that's all he said. And
right.
everybody in Phoenix shot him in the back for that. Like, well, he only spends 90 seconds on a crown prep. It's like, yeah, what crazy, crazy. But you put the consumer first, you push the technology. I mean, God, you had board certified prosthodontists and oral surgeons and lab techs, $1 million facilities, and the rest is history. I mean, look, how many times has ClearChoice been sold?
We went through three private equity deals. And you bring up, our founder, Don Maloney, was a general dentist. And he had a series of one-day denture centers all across Colorado, and always stayed away from implants because, first and foremost, they took too long. And second, they cost way too much money, right? It was just, people just really couldn't afford it. And one day he was in one of his centers, and he stopped there to have lunch with one of his doctors. And as the doc was finishing up, he was looking at a magazine, and the magazine talked about immediate placement of implants and immediate function, which he'd never heard before. And he took that magazine article and he called Malo, and excuse me, he called Nobel, and he said, who is the guy in the world that is doing this? And they said, it's this guy in Portugal. And so Maloney got on a plane because it hit him. He goes like, look, I have one day denture centers, and I make sure I put my buildings up in strip malls with lots of parking, because I got to have room for all those denture patients to come back for all those adjustments they come back for, right? So he said, I need lots of parking. But he saw this very simply as, hey, this is dentures with screws. These things aren't going to move around for people. So he flew to Portugal and talked to Malo, and that's when he got the idea. And he was very consumer oriented. He said, this is crazy. People have to run around town. They have to go see the oral surgeon or a periodontist. Then they got to go see the restorative dentist. They get 2 or 3 treatment plans. They're unsure how that's going to work with like whose fee is what, how's insurance going to cover this. You might have to go to another facility for a scan. And so he said, this is nonsense. We're going to put it all in one spot. All the doctors, all the technology, and the lab all in one spot. And we're going to make that available, and we're going to market. And he was a master marketer, and that was the genius behind it. And when I when I when I spoke with him, I you're not going to believe this, but I I've been practicing in Flint, Michigan for 23 years. And in an automobile town, it was highs and lows, right? When it was good, it was really, really good. And when it was poor, it was tough. And I had started out as the only prosthodontist in 3 counties. So I got all the denture cases that hadn't seen anybody for a long time, right? And so I had decided that maybe it was time to move out of the Rust Belt. And so I started looking, and we looked at either the Southeast or the Mountain West. And I found a practice in the Southeast that was for sale, did a lot of aesthetic dentistry, wasn't really doing any implants. And this practice was really booming. And I thought, wow, if I can add implants, then I can really make it go. And I remember laying a map of the United States out on the kitchen table and had my wife and my two children look at it. And I showed them where Myrtle Beach, South Carolina was. And I can't remember if it was my son or my daughter. They said, well, do they get hurricanes there, Dad? I said, yes, occasionally they do. And that was it for the Southeast. Now we were going to the Mountain West. And I was at my office one night. It was a Thursday night, and the ADA journal came. And I opened up the ADA journal, and it said in there, in the want ads, wanted prosthodontist for dental implant center in Denver, Colorado, fax resume 2. And that's all it had. And I brought it home and I mentioned it to my wife, and she goes, well, are you going to send them your resume? And I said, no, I don't even know who these people are. They're not even a number to call and talk to anybody. It just says fax resume 2. So I let a month go by. Next month, I get the ADA journal. I look in the back, there's that same ad. And it was later on a Thursday night, and I was like, okay, you want a resume? I'm going to give you a resume. I hope you got paper in your fax machine. And I faxed it over. And on Monday morning, I got a call from Dr. Maloney, and he said, hey, we got your resume. We'd love you to come out. So I flew out within a week or so, and they they took me to dinner and just kind of explained what they were doing. And I remember getting back to the hotel room, and I called my wife, and she says, what do you think? And I said, I think they're crazy. They're absolutely out of their mind. But you know what? They're going to do this. They are going to do this. And I see this as the brass ring coming by, and I'm not going to let this one get away. So I said, I think this is something we need to do. And so I came home, we talked it out as a family, and I remember my wife looking at me and saying, let's do it. And so we did.
Wow, that is amazing. And you know that your that business model still rings true today. I mean, they put everything under one roof. I remember when I was little, you know, both grandmas lived in Parsons, Kansas, and when the kids, we'd always spend a week with one grandma, then the week with the other grandma,
Sure.
and you had to go to the bakery for the bread, the meat man butcher. We knew who the butcher was. We knew
Yep.
his name for years. There was a vegetable, and there was no such thing as you know. Later on, as I got older, there was a food city, and they put all under one roof. And these parents don't want to go to a pediatric dentist to sit there and say, well, does little Billy need braces when he grows up? Well, I don't know. You got to go somewhere else. Here's a referral. Take another day off from work, and pain in the ass and more charge. And I see a pediatric dentist open and an orthodontist open. One plus one is one, you know, but they open up together. It's 1 + 1 = 3. They
Yep.
just grow 1.5 times faster per unit. I mean, it just explodes. Consumerism is everything. And I think it's, to me, when it came out, I used to laugh for the first 5 years of ClearChoice thinking, yeah, only in America. This is the, you
You
know,
know,
this is
you
what you'd
you
expect.
you bring up an important point. I think that the biggest impact that we've probably both seen in our careers is the rise of consumerism, right?
Absolutely.
Like, honest to gosh, I'm glad I'm not practicing right now after reading some of the reviews, that when a patient makes a complaint at the board of dentistry, a lot of times they'll include these reviews, and they're like, oh my gosh. I mean, like, there's so much vitriol, and just like, it's just like, that's got to be tough, right? And so the rise of consumerism, while it's good, because I think it improves things for the consumer, it also kind of weakens dentistry to some extent. I think it's looked on more as a commodity, less as a profession by some people.
Well, I think all markets differentiate. I mean, Adam Smith from 200 years ago. I mean, you know, all markets differentiate on price, quality, services. I mean, look at a home. I could buy an 11-bedroom mansion in Scottsdale, and I could live in a van down by the river. I mean, there's vans, and it just depends on who you are. I mean, I looked at my uncles. They had big, nice houses on golf course, but when they retired to Phoenix, Arizona, they just wanted a little trailer in a trailer park because they didn't want to clean a big old house. They didn't want to do the
Sure.
yard. And everybody in the trailer park was in the same situation, retired, and they had more fun the last 10 years of their life in the the play area of the trailer park. I mean, and every night an ambulance would come, and they'd know every morning they woke up someone died, and they'd always want to. I asked Chuck, I said, "What's the first thing you do every morning?" He goes, "Well, I always try to find out who died last night because you hear the firemen come, and you know it's not going to be good at our age."
Right.
But
Right.
I did a podcast with Dr. Ole Jensen. He from your
Ole, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Ole is Ole Jensen.
Oh, Ole Jensen,
Ole
correct.
Jensen, yeah, and he came by no time. An amazing man, and Paolo. I mean, just what a pioneer. So you let's again, I think all markets differentiate, and yeah, you have to think yin yang. I mean, something can't be good if it's not bad. I mean, if it's really good to you, it might be bad to. I mean, there's 8 billion people on the planet, and like when someone tells me like we're in a political season right now, and they'll tell me everything they love about the candidate and who they're voting for, and I say, okay, great. Now, with the same energy and enthusiasm, tell me why you would vote for the other one. Telling you, and they can't say a word. I said, okay, then you don't even know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? It's just you got to be able to think the yin yang. And you've had a lot of arrows in your back because you were with a DSO. You were advertising on television. I mean, how dare you advertising on television? Even though every one of my periodontist and oral surgeon friends in this valley for 10 years kept saying, "My God, every time they run an ad, I get another case." I mean,
Well, Nobel, early on, Nobel realized very quickly that every new market we opened, implant sales in that market increased 40%.
there you go.
40%. And it was because, a rising tide lifts all ships, and not all those patients were coming to us for the same reason that you just stated. Patients are like, can't you do this for me? Won't you be able to do my implant? I really don't want to go see somebody else. They don't want that referral, right? But yeah, no, Nobel came to us very early and said, "Holy smokes, this is like every time you guys open a new center, the implant market explodes." And it was because of the marketing.
Okay, so you're retired now, right? You're
I
officially retired.
I
So the
am.
only boss you have to answer to is your wife. So I'm not going to ask you any questions about her, but you can talk open and frankly about these.
I can.
Let's just take some real controversial questions right out of the cage.
Sure.
I mean, is an implant if it's from one of the big five? How many big implant companies would you say there are? I mean, there's got to be,
You know, I I
as far
I
as doing all the research and
yep.
taking it
I
serious.
I do believe that the the days of, oh, we sell a premium implant and then we sell a value implant. I think those days are gone. An implant is an implant is an implant, with the asterisk that I think that there are some design features of implants that do make a difference. Not so much, I think, in osseointegration, right? I think osseointegration, that's kind of like an old story, right? These implants work. But if you look at the literature and look at the level of complications over long periods of time that these people have, there are major complications out there. And one of the biggest complications that we all see in our practices, right, is peri-implantitis, right? And I think the design of the implant really makes a big difference there. And I tell you, and I say this from just studying what's going on in the marketplace. I think that the doctor who's a genius, who's been doing this a long, long time, is Jerry Nisnik. And
Right.
with his fifth generation that he's coming out with now, that really it's an implant designed to be at the crest or supracrestal, and it's got a collar without any threads on it, because in my experience, once those threads get exposed, that's where all your problems start, right? You can't start that. So, and I do think, look at you know, when a company's selling implants for $400 or $500, look at those implants have to pay for a lot of things. They have to pay for KOLs, big meetings, all kinds of things like that, right? But I truly believe we live in a time when the manufacturers of implants can produce an implant that is basically, they're all the same except for some of the design features that I've talked about. There are some that are better, um, some that are worse, and you want the best implant you can get when something goes wrong, because if you think nothing's ever going to go wrong, you and I have been practicing too long. Something always goes wrong, right? Always can go wrong. People don't take care of their implants. They think, hey, I have these implants. I don't have to brush my teeth anymore, right? And so you get all kinds of problems. But in regards to a premium implant, this implant is $500 and it's that much better than the $100 implant. I think that's nonsense. They're all coming off, they're all the same titanium. They're all being milled to extraordinary standards. I think an implant is an implant is an implant with the asterisk of certain design features, especially for longevity, are better. And I think no one's addressing that in the marketplace as strongly as Niznik is now. And he's a genius. He's been doing it for um, 40, 50 years, right?
I know.
So
And when he emails you, it's always the craziest hours, and you can count it out. It's always one email, and I'm just sitting there like, yeah, count to 10. Ding, there's a follow up email. Count to 10. Ding, there's a third. I love the way his mind is it's just crazy. So you're also 8 years at the board, at the Colorado Dental Board. And one of the things a lot of people say I've seen on Dental Town is that, well, you can't get some no name, no brand implant because if you get sued, you're going to go to the board. You're not going to have any research to support this implant. Is that true or false?
well, I I I don't think that's necessarily true because um, there isn't the level of research now like there was back in the day when things started. I mean, when Brandemark started, this was you know this was something that was brand new, and there was a lot of research being done on it, and a lot of people piggybacked off that research, but osteointegration, is a proven fact. I think that no matter what implant, if you end up before a board or you end up in a malpractice suit, I don't think you're protected by saying I use an expensive implant. I think you're protected by you being able to say, this is the implant I use and this is why I use it, and be able to do that. And unfortunately, a lot of dentists, I don't know that they really know why they're using one implant over another versus I like the rep,
And that's
or
important. That's
yes,
important.
yes, absolutely. But you should be able to, you should be able to stand behind it. It's no different. Why do you choose a gold crown versus a porcelain crown versus, you should be able to stand behind what you do, right?
When I traded implants, I got my. I'm not a prosthodontist or anything like you. I went to the Mish's deal and got my fellowship in the Mish
Yes, yes.
and my diplomat in implantology and all that stuff. But the rep out here, when I would ask him a question, he'd always come by the office and said, "Okay, so I got this prosthodontist, this oral surgeon, and these other two dentists with the same question. We're all gonna have beers at this bar after." It was so cool. He always knew who you had to meet, and he was always the bartender ringleader,
Yeah, and you have major advantages not being a prosthodontist because myself and my colleagues, a prosthodontist is a dentist that can take the innately simple and make it highly complex. That's what we do, right? So I think that, over time, I've learned that simplicity is better, right? Build things knowing that they're going to break at some point because, you practice long enough, you'll see enough of your own dentistry fail for a number of reasons, right?
and that's the only reason you get good. My favorite prosthodontist of all time, who was the guy? He passed away. His last job was at Green Laboratory, I think, in Arkansas. And he'd always lecture. His whole lecture was every one of his cases that failed. What was his name? Just a
Oh gosh, I don't know.
yeah,
Green Laboratory.
in Arkansas. But anyway, I think the biggest problem with all on four is the people that lose all the teeth. They're very seldom yoga instructors who eat too much tofu. They're always smoking, drinking. They're probably all Irish, and then they get this. So then they come into your office and they got, three sandwiches underneath their teeth. But the question is, um, when they come in, should the all on four be removed? That's very hard to do. And I mean, a lot of people think, well, if I'm going to do an all on four cleaning, I'm going to charge like $400 or $500. I mean, it's no easy task to remove an all on four to clean. So my question to you specifically is, do they need to be removed to clean? If so, what would a fee for that be? Or can you just successfully clean it, leaving it all attached?
I think that's a really good question. There was a study done a number of years ago, and this is a very small sample size, right? But it basically said you're better off not taking them apart, right? I never bought that. I never bought that. I just saw too many of these people, they were losing their teeth because they just had, look at, they might have had bad luck or bad circumstances, or there was something going on that allowed them to lose their teeth. And a lot of them don't have a lot of great oral hygiene associated with that. So, we started a hygiene program when I was still practicing at ClearChoice. We wanted to see these patients once a year. We removed it. We ultrasonically cleaned it. We made sure there wasn't any calculus associated with the abutments. If we saw areas of inflammation, the hygienist would work with our patient in regards to how do we clean that area better. I always felt better about that. It allowed me to tighten everything up and check everything. And if you have a very efficient system, right? Going back to your comments about the 90-second crown prep, if you have a highly efficient system and you have highly trained people, removal and replacement of those prostheses isn't difficult. Now, if you don't do that very often, and you're a general dentist and you haven't seen many of these things. Oh, goodness gracious. Yes, it's a big deal to take one of these things apart because you're not used to doing it, right? So, I've had colleagues refer their patients to general dentists, and I was comfortable referring my patients back to their general dentist if the general dentist was comfortable with it. And if they wanted some training, myself, my assistants, my hygienists, we would work with their team and show them, hey, this is how you get the thing off and on easily and things like that. But I always felt better having the patient on at least, most patients I think you can see once a year. There were a few that just had problems where you'd want to see them a little more often. But we always saw them for maintenance and we took it off. Although I will say that that is controversial and there are some people that don't believe they ought to come off. But I guess I'm old school in that regard.
It was talk about a pioneer. It was in 2005. You put up one of the most successful online C courses ever to this day on Dental Town. Had over 10,000 views. Called a successful strategy for the efficient, consistent, and profitable restoration of dental implants.
I'm glad you remember that because I remember working with your team in in doing that and putting that together. And that was I had started peer practicum with Sulzer Dental at the time. And that program had been so successful. We had a team of doctors who spread out over the country. We would meeting in the basement of restaurants and country clubs. And I think one of the things they really got out of it is we had them bring cases of their own. And we treatment planned them in a group, right? And so I think that they were able to really learn because they were working on their cases. It wasn't just abstract, right? It was their patients. They were bringing in models and radiographs and things like that. And I do remember putting that program together for you. So I'm glad you were able to find that.
Well, the prosthodonts I was talking about was Charles English,
Oh gosh. Oh yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah. A god.
he had the highest self esteem in any lecture I've ever seen because the only cases he would show were his failures.
Yeah.
And he said, I could stand up here and show you perfect cases all day long, but I didn't learn anything from doing a case with no complications.
Yep.
He would show stuff where you would just like, God, I can't believe he's admitting to that one. And he just had, and he said, I'm going to show you all my mistakes because that's where you learn. And I remember one time I called him up and I was very depressed and I had an implant failure case. And he said, no, you don't need to come down here. You don't need to watch me. What you need to do is get back on your horse. You're fine. Okay. You got bucked off the horse. You know why you got bucked off. Get back on the horse, shut the blink up and get back on the horse. I mean, he was just, God, he was a great guy.
Yeah, and to your point you made earlier, many of these patients, it's patient selection, right? The 3 pack a day smoker probably isn't a great candidate for dental implants. Surely not immediate load, right? Full arch, right? And so I think that you have to be a little discriminating in choosing your patients as well.
That was a big schism in the Mish brothers, Carl versus his brother, and his Carl, he'd do the smokers. His brother Craig, and I believe his wife too, they won't do it. And I guess so what is your thought on that? Carl basically told me on his podcast, his last podcast he did before he passed, I think it was like 3 hours long. I mean, it had like 20, I mean, he just did a kiss and tell on the whole dental implant deal. It was just amazing. All the things he brought up, all the things he thought was voodoo. Like he thought the drawing blood and spinning it and the platelet stuff. He thought that was all voodoo. You're nodding your head. Do you agree? Do you think that was?
It's funny that started when I was in Flint. They started doing the PRP, right? And I remember when I got to Denver, I spoke to Dr. Jensen about that. And I brought it up and I said something to him about it. And he looked at me like I had two heads. It was like, okay, we're not doing PRP. He felt the same way. He felt that it just wasn't needed.
I don't want to beat an old point, but I got to come back to that cleaning thing because you know, um, I've heard. I think it was Carl Jung or some pioneer said that at the basic level, humans see everything. We're animals, so we start seeing everything. It starts out as predator or prey.
Mhm.
Are you going to eat me or am I going to eat you? Am I your resource or are you my resource? So they
Right.
live in fear. They just live in fear, especially with dental boards and lawyers. A lot of them say, they keep saying on Dental Town that if an all on four comes in and you remove the whole thing and something goes wrong, you own it. And it's a $50,000 per. I mean, how much is an all on four today in today's $2024? What's
Probably around upper and lower arches is around that $50,000.
Yeah.
But
So they
but
see this $50,000 case. They think, man, if I take this off and screw it up, I own it. I don't have $50,000 to have it redone. So would you
Yeah,
back
so
on that
so
again?
I think there's real risk and there's fantasy risk, right? I think that if you're taking one of those apart and you don't know what you're doing, you're putting yourself at great risk. I think if you're trained and you understand what you're doing and you have the right equipment and training to be able to do it, there's not a whole lot that should be going wrong, right? Now, I those patients who saw their general dentist, um, I told those general dentists, if you take a radiograph and see bone loss on an implant, don't feel like that's your problem. Send them back to me, right? They're my patient as well. And so I think there's real risk and then there's kind of fantasy risk.
Yeah. What was that? What's that saying that I think it was Cicero that said almost all your worries never come true.
Right,
Almost all.
right. I
Um,
try I try to explain that to my children, right? It's like, you're worrying about stuff that's probably never going to happen. So,
yeah. So is all on four, is that still a good nomer or is because you see all on six, you see, I mean, do you still like the all on four? Do you like the all on six? I mean, there's a big variety. What's
you know, um, I was never a fan of the all on X, right? Uh, I just thought that was a made up term, right? I will tell you that
sounds like an Elon Musk term.
yeah,
X.
yeah, there
he names
there
he
there
names
you
everything
go.
X.
My first mentor in dentistry told me something. He said, Mark, you don't always need a fully adjustable articulator as long as you always have a fully adjustable mind. When we treated patients, I think uh, a presentation I did years ago. I think in the mandible, our all on four rate was over 90%, like 94, 95% of the time we used four implants. But that didn't mean we used four implants 100% of the time. In the maxilla, it was a little bit lower. It was probably 93, 94% of the time. So we never hesitated to utilize additional implants if we needed them. I think the whole thing about the all on four is that it's been proven without a doubt biomechanically you can support a um a uh a full set of teeth on four implants that are properly placed with the proper AP spread. I mean, that is settled science. But also, like for instance, Dr. Niznik feels very strongly that angled implants with angled abutments are just more complicated and more um, challenging to do. And I think he has a point. He would prefer to see more straight implants placed. Well, if you have the bone, there's nothing wrong with that either. So I think that, you utilize the number of implants you need to be able to build the patient teeth that they can function with, and have proper comfort, function, and aesthetics. And you make sure that you have a fully adjustable mind as you go about doing it. Because to say, well, I'm only going to use four, that's just as bad as saying I'm only going to do six, right? It's like, you use your brain, use your experience, see what the patient's, their needs are, what type of bone is available, and things like that. But all on four is settled science. I mean, it works.
So there's a you cover a lot. You there's so many boogeymans in your bio. I mean, DSOs, advertising on TV, pioneering and all on four. With God forbid someone from Portugal, they're not even from America.
Right, right.
And I've watched you. I've watched you. Like say you're probably like the first, second, third guy I tried to get on this show, and
You're
I
very
I,
kind.
I finally got you. And so I want to talk to you about the other bad guy. I mean, you're with first of all you're with the worst guy. You're with the dental board. That generates the most fear in all kids, and I want to come back to that because the young kids. And in fact, we can go there, but you can start with that. The young kids, the millennials, they always are asking me, how do you stay away from the board? How do you avoid the board? So let's just go there.
Yeah,
So she's
sure.
out of school and she's thinking, I want to do this molar root canal, but she knows if she goes, it's not fair because if I do a root canal, let's say I get $1,000, okay, and that buys a Ford Escort. Well, the endodontist gets $1,500, and that's a Ford Taurus. And if my root canal goes south, I'm going to go to the board, and some guy who doesn't even do $1,000 Ford Tauruses is going to do a $1,500. I mean, he's not going to do a Ford Escort. He's going to do an expensive Ford Taurus for 1,500. Going to grade all my work and blah blah blah. So talk to that young millennial. She's 30 years old and she just fears ending up at the Colorado State Board of Dental Examiners. What would you
You know,
tell them?
you bring up an interesting point. Just because your root canal fails doesn't mean, I mean, look at anybody can file a complaint. That doesn't mean they're going to be successful at the dental board, right? Failure of a procedure is not grounds for moving against someone's license because things fail in dentistry. Not following the standard of care, that will get you in trouble, right? So first and foremost, in the Dental Practice Act, for whatever state you're in, understand, and from the dentists around you, understand what the standard of care is. If you perforate a tooth during an endodontic procedure and don't recognize it by not taking, the proper types of radiographs, that's a violation of the standard of care, right? If you have a patient who's having problems and you're not sure why, and you can't get your hands around this, refer that patient to a specialist. Failure to refer, that's the standard, that's a failure of the standard of care. Um, I'll be honest with you, I've been on the board for 8 years. It's very interesting. I would say that the vast majority of situations I see are self-inflicted wounds by dentists, right? They fail to talk with patients, right? Um, they just don't have the level of conversations they ought to be having, and so those patients become extremely frustrated and they lash out, right? It's not easy to get a malpractice attorney to take a case these days because there has to be enough money in it for them to really make it. So they're looking at egregious cases, right? But it doesn't take much to file a complaint at the dental board. But I see that so in regards to self-inflicted wounds, write it down, right? I think that's one of the most important things is to like write down what you are doing, right? When dentists fail to do that, that's a violation of the standard of care. Um, you know, Make sure that you talk to patients about options, right? There has to be informed consent, right? Do things to the best of your ability and document it all. Just because it goes bad doesn't mean it's going to be a bad outcome with the dental board. In my 3 years now as chair, I always preach to the other members. Dentistry, there's art and science, right? We can both look at a tooth and say there's caries there or possibly caries there. You might decide to treat that caries. I might decide to watch it. Doesn't mean either one of us are wrong, but there is some art in dentistry as well, right? And so I think that living in fear of the dental board is not the way to practice. But I will tell you, a perfect example of this was when I came to Denver, right? I got a target on my back. Everybody's looking at me, right? And I was accused of, oh, you're just ripping teeth out of patients and putting all these implants in. All right. So I said to myself and my team, we are going to document everything we do to the nth degree, right? Every patient had a periodontal charting. I made sure that there was the documentation that I could prove that there was a terminal dentition, right? Or I could make a really good case that there was a terminal dentition and it was justified to take this patient's teeth out. And so I remember I would document things to the nth degree, practicing a little defensively because of the environment I was in. That kept me out of trouble. I never had a board complaint against me because if they wanted to take a look at what I was doing, they were more than welcome to look because I had everything documented to the nth degree on what I was going to do and most importantly, why I was going to do it.
I love that. That's in Star Wars, that's a word I haven't heard in a long time. I haven't heard terminal dentition in a long time. The funniest thing, was born and raised in Kansas, went to Creighton in Nebraska, is I know you're so Midwestern because you've already said look it 3 times. If they say look it, they're only from the Midwest. No one else
Sure.
says that unless they're from the Midwest. That is there any low, again, I want to go back because the board is, they're so scared of it. Is there any low hanging fruit on avoiding
Yes.
board? What
Yes.
is some low hanging fruit? Keep talking to that 30-year-old girl who just does not want to go to the Colorado State Board of Dental Examiners.
You have to remember a dental board's charge is to protect the public, right? Their job isn't to protect dentists, but I think you have to take that into consideration. It's also not to prosecute dentists, right? The job is to protect the public. And I know on our board, the number one thing that gets us concerned is when we have a complaint around infection control. Because Howard, if you do a crown on someone and they complain about it, if we look at that case, we're worried about one person, that patient who had that care. But if you have an infection control issue, water lines, for instance, spore testing, oh my gosh, there's a lot of patients that could be impacted negatively on that. And so making sure that, when we get one of those complaints, we usually do a no knock. We send in an inspector and we do a no knock. And that's when the wheels can come off the bus, right? If you don't have if you don't have your records on waterline testing, if you don't have your spore testing, right? If you don't have, if you don't have the OSHA and HIPAA training that your team is supposed to have, if you don't have an infection control specialist who's kind of in charge of that, that's low hanging fruit for uh, a dental board to take a look at, because that puts significant numbers of the public at risk. Everybody that comes into that practice is at risk. And so that'll usually get your attention big time, right? And the other thing, I'll just go back to what I said, is that, once a patient makes a complaint and you ask for the record, then everything in that record is fair game. And low hanging fruit a lot of times is lack of documentation, right? They say, well, verbally I gave consent, but you don't even put in your chart that you verbally gave consent, and there are no consent forms. Help me help you, because you're not providing me any information that you provided any informed consent at all, right?
There's a monster size removable partial lab down here in Nogales, Arizona, because all the cases go to Nogales, Arizona, and they drive them across the border. And there's this big partial van. I go down there and look at that thing. It's amazing. I mean, they do 1,000 partials a day, and 90% of the scripts just lower partial. Like
Oh
that's
yeah.
that's it. Two
Yep.
words, lower partial.
Yep.
Wow. I mean, and so
Yeah.
what percent of the records would you say you see at the board? It was just like, number four DO. That was it. Just
Unfortunately, a high level of that lack of documentation. And I remember one time I had an associate and we were talking about this. This was before I was on the dental board. And my associate, I said, I was looking at his documentation and I said, this is inadequate. This is not our standard of care here at this practice. And he said, I don't have time. And I said, then you're going too fast. I don't care what you're doing. If you don't have time to do this, you need to make time, right? I'm not putting pressure on you to go a certain speed or anything else like that. If you don't have time to do it right, how are you going to ever have time to do it over, or to address a board complaint, right? So, you try to tell young people, look at, always do the right thing. And that used to be easy to say, but as I get older, I come to find out a lot of them don't know what the right thing is. You kind of need to spell that out. I try to tell young dentists, never, ever, ever make a decision about the dentistry you're going to be providing based on finances. Never, ever, ever. I said, do the right thing. The finances always figure themselves out. Um, you know, Never make a partial refund. A partial refund usually gets you in front of the dental board or sued because the patient's still upset, right? Just refund them their money. If it didn't work out, it's the cost of doing business, right? I've given back, as many dentists have, hundreds of thousands of dollars just because, you know what, that was the way that we were going to end this. I mean, like, you have your opinion, I have mine. Let's take care of this, and I'm not going to make any financial drain on you by being able to do this. But I see more problems when they try to hold their ground in regards to finances. That usually gets an irate patient to go to the board.
and dentists they're they need to live in reality. I mean, you look at the average in 2023, the total return sales for retail sales in the United States was 14.5%. And for online, it's 17.6%. And dentists lose their mind when they do 1%.
Right,
They have to refund 1 crown. And I'm like, well, what percent of your revenue last year did you have to refund? It's
right,
never even a percent. It's their ego. And Walmart's like, I mean, you can go buy a sleeping bag, take it out hunting. I know you're live at the gates of the Rocky Mountains. You could go up there and camp out for a week and bring it back, and it's all torn, rocks, sticks, twigs in it, and say it was ripped. They're not even going to argue with you because they know you go to Walmart once a week for the rest of your life. They don't even play.
right.
They just take it
Exactly,
back. And then the
exactly.
dentist, his ego's popped and he
And
just
and
loses his
and I
mind.
love it. I love it when they say it's not fair. And I
Fair.
say, Fair is where you get cotton candy, right? That's what fair is. That's, it's just like look at it's the cost of doing business at times. And especially going back to your earlier comment, when you have a much higher level of consumerism and agitated patients, because Walmart will accept that sleeping bag back, but you won't give them their money back for their filling or crown or whatever it is. You become an outlier now because you're not fitting in with the rest of the consumer world.
And that cotton candy was invented by the dentist William Morrison. So
A dentist. Well,
yeah,
he
and,
was
and it started out as fairy floss from the tooth fairy. It was fairy floss, and then eventually it went to cotton candy. Um, I um I got to go back to implants because I mean when I think of the most number one legendary implant on all on, I mean it's got to be you guys. I mean you guys made a bigger impact, and I mean all on four. I mean you basically created the category. I mean, really, you guys
mhm,
created the category. So the next big old thing that everybody freaks out about is immediate load. Uh,
mhm.
because they're consumers. Of course they want to come in, get the tooth pulled, walk out with the tooth in. So obviously Americans want everything right now. They want instant satisfaction, instant gratification. What are your thoughts on immediate load?
I think that immediate load is settled science. It has to be done well, right? I was very fortunate to work with uh, Ole Jensen, who was a magnificent surgeon, and we were always able to get implants in place. And I think, Howard, maybe in the early years, we had one or two patients that we couldn't load. But I will tell you, over the last 10-year plus run, we loaded everybody. We were able to do that. And out there in Phoenix, you have, Dr. Caesar Butera is at the Phoenix Center, just a incredible surgeon. I think the ability to be able to place implants in the proper location with the proper torque and standing to be able to withstand immediate loading, I think it has a lot to do with the skill set of the surgeon involved, right? So, the worst case scenario for a dental rep or for a dentist is, you go take the implant course, you buy your drill kit and your 50 implants, and uh, a year goes by and you've used two of those implants up and you have 48 left. That's not good for your patients. It's not good for you. Like you said, you have to get back on the horse, right? The more reps you get, the better you're going to get, right? Do you want to see a heart surgeon who's done one of these procedures, or do you want the guy putting your stents in who's done 1,000 of them, right? And so I think that uh, immediate function settled science. That doesn't mean it applies to every case. If I've got poor bone and a 3 pack a day smoker, maybe we choose to live to fight another day, and maybe we don't immediately load that implant, especially if it's a single tooth implant and isn't braced in place. But with the all on four, you get the added cross arch stabilization, which played a huge role in biomechanically stabilizing those types of implants. But I think at the end of the day, it has a lot to do with the skill set of the surgeon.
And what about warranty and maintenance? I mean, someone comes in and gives you guys 50 grand,
Yeah.
and then the whole case fails. But they lost all their teeth. I mean, I hate to
Yep.
be biased, but I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. Sometimes I think crystal meth was invented. I know it was invented by the Japanese in World War II, but sometimes I think it was invented in Apache Junction. I mean, almost every fire in a trailer park is a meth lab. I mean, the fire department discovers 10 times more meth labs than the police department. Okay. And so I have a big bias out here. I mean, almost a lot of the implant patients I did, I mean, it was meth mouth, they lost. So they don't have the best tracker. They don't have the best still. So, I mean, they're still going to be them, and they relapse with their addiction. So how do you warranty a $50,000 case? I mean, at what
Sure.
point do you say we're
The
going to redo it?
the attorneys would never let you use the word warranty, right? But how we handled it is on my watch, we handled any problems whatsoever with your dental implants for 5 years, no questions asked. Implant loss, prosthesis breakage, anything. It did not matter. No questions asked, as long as you committed to the maintenance program. And if you were part of the maintenance program, it was 5 years, no problem, because that's when most of the
What
problems
was the
with
maintenance
implants
program?
occur.
Did you come in once a year to have it removed and cleaned?
Once a year. And you had mentioned fees. I tried to get a fee. I tried to get a fee that was very similar to a patient coming in and having their teeth cleaned, right? It's kind of a loss leader, right? And you can't charge $500 or $600. I just took my dog in to have her teeth cleaned, right? And I was stunned because, they have to use anesthesia, so I expected that. But the anesthesia bill was only like $168, right? The pro fee itself, the actual pro fee was $400. And I was like, we don't even charge humans that that amount of money for a prophylaxis. So, I tried to have a fee commensurate with what a regular pro fee costs anybody, because with these types of implant prosthesis, it's not like you're in there scaling anything, right? It's basically removal of the prosthesis ultrasonically, making sure that it's clean, and then putting it back together. There's rarely any calculus around the implant abutments and things like that, and some oral hygiene. And as long as the patient did that once a year, we had no problem covering any issues they had for 5 years, which is when most of the issues happened.
I was reading a paper that said, when the new antibiotics came out, it took like 20 years before a resistant antibiotic was, resistance was discovered to that antibiotic, and then it eventually fell to 10 years. But now, when a new antibiotic comes out, within 1 year they find resistance, and they just keep screaming about the overprescribing antibiotics by dentists and physicians. And I mean, there's guys. I mean, you're talking to so many dentists right now, and a lot of them say, "Well, it's CYA, cover your ass." Every time I do a root canal and extraction, I always give a Pen VK or an amoxicillin and a prescription of pain pills or whatever. So you're doing an all on four. What percent of those all on fours did you prescribe antibiotics for? Is that
We didn't prescribe antibiotics pre-surgery. We did prescribe antibiotics post-surgery.
we're all on fours?
Because, yes,
And what
because
would you
most
prescribe?
most of the patients that we saw, had major periodontal disease going on, right? And so, based on the level of disease, I actually wasn't prescribing that was being described by Dr. Jensen. But we would generally cover that patient for the initial 7 to 10 days, because there was active disease in those patients that we were removing during the bone removal process, making sure those sockets where those infected teeth were really clean and things like that. And so I think it was just more or less, it wasn't so much CYA as it was is like, look at these patients have periodontal disease. It's a major mouth infection going on. We need to provide them with a little bit of a Kickstarter here.
And do you remember what he would prescribe? I mean, did he have a go-to regimen?
You know, we had I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, I can't remember what it was, but
Okay, so now the last subject. I know I can't believe I already had the hour's already gone, but I still got one last subject I got to get. The newest boogeyman now for basically all of America is these private equity, and
right,
I think it's because they're private. They're not trying like the NFL. I cannot tell you how many hours of my life I've wasted watching NFL football. I mean, it is basically you. I just love the NFL. But if it wasn't for Green Bay, which is owned by the city, it's public,
right,
wouldn't know any stats about the NFL. I mean, the
right,
NFL would be completely private. Just like if you're listening to me and you got a private dental office, nobody knows your numbers and you're private. So private equity is private. It's not transparent. And we've seen, I think when I got out of college, there was like 6,000 publicly traded companies, and the average one was like 65 years old, and now it's down to 3,000 public companies, and the average one's only 10 years old. So the speed of burning and churning, I mean, you can be the greatest company in the world, but you're going to get ran over from behind by someone that can do it faster, easier, higher quality, lower cost, and scalable. And so private equity is it's going to, by being non-transparent, it's going to generate a million fearful thoughts that none come true. But what is your thoughts about what is private equity and what do you think of private equity, and what do you think of what private equity and DSOs has brought to dentistry? How has that changed dentistry?
So that's a big question. I'll try to be succinct, but first let's talk about private equity. I've been through three private equity deals. I'm on a board that is owned by another private equity that owns a DSO. I think that
Look at
um, the good part of private equity is when they put a proper management team in place. That helps dentistry a lot. When I say a proper management team, I mean people that understand dentistry, respect dentists, respect that the dentists are going to make the decisions about the welfare of patients, right? When you start having the business people telling dentists what to do, that was always a red flag for me. That's a very, very bad thing, right? So if you can put a CEO, a CFO, a COO in place that understand dentistry, right? I'm having a blast right now with Salt Dental because that private equity team, Latticeworks Capital, has brought in a management team that, man, I wish I was young enough to go work for them. They are doing it the right way, and it's a doctor-led organization. The doctors are in charge of patient care. That's a great example. I'll tell you another bad example. The first private equity deal we did when Dr. Maloney first sold out, we had a private equity company come in, and they made a mistake. They hired a CEO who had never been a CEO before. He was 35 years old. He didn't understand dentists and dentistry. He thought that the dentist had a shirt with their name with a circle around it over their right breast that said Earl or something, because he thought the dentist worked for him, and he thought the dentist would just do whatever he told them to do. And I was just a doctor in a center at the time. Now I was in the number one center, right? But this guy was just a mess. And I remember sitting in his office and looking at him right in the face and talking to him in non-Christian, non-Midwest terms about what I thought about him and what he was doing. And it took forever um, lobbying that private equity team to make them realize you've made a real mistake here, right? We were within 6 months of bankruptcy at ClearChoice. We had 6 months worth of cash left. And that's when they got rid of him and they brought in Kevin Mosier. And Kevin Mosier was the CEO who, the first thing he did is he changed our culture. And he put the doctors had a seat at the table. That was very important. And he started bringing in extreme competence on his leadership team. And the rest is history, right? It took it to 1.2 billion on our last transaction. So I think that the vital role that private equity can play is making sure that they have the right um, leadership team in place, right? I practiced 23 years in a solo private practice and 17 years in a DSO. I'll be honest with you. I would never go back to solo private practice. Oh my gosh. COVID, perfect example. I don't know how dentists made it by themselves through COVID, right? I know what we were trying to do, as a team, tracking down gloves, right? And masks and, the heroic efforts of a whole team of people working in that direction. Whereas, the dental society in Denver made really tried to get involved in helping a lot of dentists out, right? Because they were by themselves. So I think when private equity does it right and the DSO does it right, meaning they're very efficient and sharp and able to leverage their size and run a business ethically and morally correctly, that's a big boon to dentistry. And if they leave the doctors alone and just let the doctors focus on dentistry, that's when it really works, right? That's when it really works. But as soon as you start telling dentists what to do, I think that's when things go very, very bad, very, very bad.
We're seeing this on play right in front of our eyes with Boeing. I mean, forever, the CEO of Boeing was always a crackpot aeronautical engineer who probably was smarter than all the engineers that work for him. And then they decided, oh, screw that. We're going to get a business person and we're going to move the headquarters from Seattle to Washington, D.C., because that's where all the big contracts are with the military and the management. They got out of the making airplane business. And then next
And
thing you know, the
right.
quality. So it
And
makes me wonder.
I'll have colleagues say to me, "Oh, these DSOs, they're just turning out bad dentistry." Well, I got to tell you, after 8 years on the Colorado Dental Board, I've seen just as much bad dentistry out of solo practice as I have seen out of a DSO practice. It's that individual dentist, right? So there's no monopoly on bad dentistry on either side.
But a lot of the states, there's 50 states. They each have a dental board, and they all have different laws, right? Every every
Yep,
every dental board, like dental board of Colorado, could have different statutes and laws than dental board of Arizona, right?
completely, absolutely.
And a lot of those states came to the conclusion over the last 20, 30, 40 years that you shouldn't own a dental office if you weren't a dentist. Do you think
Right.
CEO of every dental DSO should be a dentist?
You know, no. Because I think that it's a rarity. It's a rarity for a dentist to have the skills to be a top-notch CEO after having been around some extremely high-functioning CEOs, because we go to dental school and we learn dentistry, right? And even dentists who go and get masters, they don't have that 20 years where they go through the business world and they start as a manager and they work their way up finally to the executive level, right? There's nothing by that. But I think that, like in our model, right? The doctors owned the centers. I was the owner of my center. I was the PC owner of my center. I think that's a model that works because at the end of the day, the buck stops with me, right? We have situations now where a doctor will say, "Oh yeah, the patient didn't get a refund because the DSO isn't going to give them a refund." Well, you know what, doc? That's your practice. That's on you. That the buck stops with you. You have to make that decision. And I've never had a problem going to my general manager of my center and saying we're going to give back Mrs. Jones her money back, and this is what we're going to do. I've never had any pushback from that, and if I ever got pushback on that, I'd have a lot to say about it because it's my practice. And so I do think it's important that dentists own practices. Dentist CEOs, I think those are rarer than hen's teeth. And that's another Midwest statement. So,
Oh, the only advice I got on heads is I don't know why I didn't realize that you do not need a rooster. They go after your grandchildren. They're a pain in the butt. They
right,
always scared
right.
me, and I'm like, why do I need a rooster? I don't need a rooster. So now me and now everyone I got four boys, but now everybody's got rid of the rooster. So hen without teeth
Okay.
and a chicken pen with no roosters. But hey, it was an honor that you took the time to
No,
come on this
it was
show.
my honor. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time. The time just seemed right. It's my honor. You are extremely well known. I couldn't imagine sitting down and talking with anybody but you. So the honor's all mine.
I can't believe and what a 20-year journey from your online CE course on Dental Town in
Yes.
2005 to almost
Yeah.
2025. But thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.
And God bless. Thank you.
All right, have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.